Yo, Shortbox Nation, hello again. Welcome back, and thanks for pressing play today. If you're brand new, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Botter Milligan, and this is the Shortbox Podcast, the comic book talk show that brings you the best conversations about your favorite comics with the people who put their blood, sweat, and tears into making them. This is episode 490, and today we have a certified comic legend on the podcast. I'm talking about Stephen Bissette. He's here with us today. He's best known as the artist on Alan Moore's inaugural saga of the Swamp Thing run, as well as the horror comic anthology series Taboo. Bissette is also the co-creator of the character of John Constantine, who some of you might remember was played by Keanu Reeves in the feature film Constantine back in 2005. Now, with all the awards and accolades we could spend talking, now with all the awards and accolades to his name, it might come as a surprise to some of you that Steve actually retired from comics, or at least self-publishing, back in 1999, after working in the industry full-time for 24 years. But I've got air quotes around retirement, because retirement didn't stop him from working on the occasional short story or anthology comic in the subsequent years. He also went into academia in 2005 and started teaching at the Center for Cartoon Studies in Vermont, where he's from. So the man has kept plenty busy since the so-called retirement. And today, Bissette is on the podcast to talk about a new Kickstarter campaign launching next month that will bring back his underground comic, Tyrant, which was a 4-issue series originally published in 1994 through 1996. It tells a story about a T-Rex's struggle for survival in the late Cretaceous period. Many fans consider Tyrant Bissette's masterpiece, and for good reason. As someone who has just read the first issue of this new Kickstarter campaign, I gotta say, breathtaking. And we'll get into a lot of Tyrant talk and all of that here shortly with Bissette. But first, I want to thank our amazing sponsors who help us keep the lights on here at Shortbox HQ.
What would I do without you?
That's right. What would we be without our sponsors? Like IDW Publishing, the award-winning publisher of comics, graphic novels, and books like TMNT, Star Trek, Sonic the Hedgehog. And speaking of giant lizards, IDW also publishes Godzilla comics. Go find and read some of these fine books at your local comic shop, or check out idwpublishing.com. And last but not least, a big shout out to Collective Con, Northeast Florida's premier anime, comic book, and pop culture event. It's taking place again here in Jacksonville, Florida on March 27th through the 29th. It's their 11th year show. It's going to be a good time. I'll be there, and you can get your tickets at collectivecon.com. Now, without further ado, Shortbox Nation, let's give it up for our guest of honor today. It's Steve Bissette. Hey, Steve.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure, man. I got to give a big shout out to Sean Edgar, who once again has set up another great, interview. Like I said, the interview hasn't happened yet, but I'm sure it will be great because you're Steve Bissette.
I'll hold
Now,
up
Steve-
my end. I'll hold up my end.
Steve, like I told you before we hit record, I've been looking forward to this interview all day. I've been, as like I do with all my interviews, I go down deep rabbit holes. I feel like I've got tunnel vision, and I put everything else to the side to get ready for interviews like this. But one random fact I came across while, researching your life and stuff is that you're from Vermont,
Yep.
and I'm here in Jacksonville, Florida. There happens to be a Jacksonville, Vermont, or a Jacksonville in Vermont.
There is.
News to me.
There is. Right. And Jacksonville, which just south, like the next town south of Wilmington, Vermont, which is where I was living when I was drawing Swamp Thing all through the 80s, and where I did Tyrant. So Jacksonville was just one town down. It was a little tiny village, few houses, really great little mom and pop grocery store that also rented very strange VHS tapes, which meant I stopped there all the time. And then as you headed south from Jacksonville, it brought you into Coleraine, Massachusetts.
Well, Steve, I'm going to go ahead and thank you, but also apologize to all of the listeners that from this point going forward, the connection I will make between Jacksonville and Swamp Thing and Tyrant will be irritating to all the listeners. But look at that, man. Jacksonville, even though it's not my Jacksonville, it's a Jacksonville with connections to a great comic series. You guys will not hear the end of this. Now, Steve, I have also had dinosaurs on the brain all day. And I was kind of beating myself up because, admittedly, I had never read Tyrant until the past couple of days.
Well, why would you?
It's not like it's been out of print since 1999, or since the
Well, it
90s.
has been. Yeah, really. So,
So it's the irony is that last year I was really in a dinosaur kick because I ended up reading, not even reading, like devouring the first or the only two Jurassic Park books, Jurassic Park and Lost World by Michael Crichton. And I was really big into dinosaurs as a kid. That love has always been there, but maybe not fully tapped into. But last year I devoured these Jurassic Park books. I was all about dinosaurs, and now I'm reading Tyrant. Now I'm trying to track down the rest of the issues. I'm definitely gonna be back in the Kickstarter. But I want to start off this conversation finding out from you, what are some of your favorite, Tyrant excluded, what are some of your favorite comic books about dinosaurs?
oh, that's easy. I love a lot of the current dino stuff that has been coming out. I mean, contemporary to my launching Tyrant was Ricardo Delgado's fantastic Age of Reptiles
Yeah.
through Dark Horse. Um, but I've also enjoyed more recent works. Tad Galusha did a great graphic novel called Cretaceous a few
Hmm.
years back. Um, there's been, but I go back. I'm old school. I mean, I grew up reading dinosaur comics, and
Hmm.
luckily, during the Silver Age, there were a lot of them. Right. So Turok, Son of Stone,
Yeah.
big time favorite for me. Alberto Gialetti was the artist on the series when I was growing up, meaning they were being drawn in Italy at Gialetti's studio, but being published in America by Dell and then later Gold Key after 1962. Um, Kona, Monarch of Monster Isle, not Conan,
Hmm.
Kona, Kona, Monarch of Monster Isle, which was drawn by the late great Sam Glanzman, and it was Sam's work that made me want to draw comics when I
Hmm.
was like 4 and 5 years old. And Kona hit when I was 7, and it was my absolute favorite comic, and it's still one of my all-time favorite adventure fantasy comics. Dell published 21 issues in all, and
Wow.
they're fabulous.
All right.
Lots of dinosaurs,
Yeah, I could
Potter.
tell.
And the other one that was a favorite was The War That Time Forgot,
Hmm.
which was the cover feature in Star Spangled War stories from DC Comics from about 1960 to about, I would guess, 65 or so. Ross Andrew and Mike Esposito were the primary artists, but there were also some great issues by Russ Heath, Joe Kubert, Gene
Hmm.
Colan did an issue.
I'm
Uh,
gonna
Great dinosaur comic.
I'm gonna have to look that up. If I may make an honorable mention, one that uh, was one of my favorites when I think about it. Obviously, I think Cadillacs and Dinosaurs is
Oh,
absolutely a
yeah,
classic.
Mark Schultz,
Yeah,
Xenozoic Tales. Yeah,
I think
fantastic.
most recently there was a series by Daniel Warren Johnson and artist Juan Gideon called Jurassic League, where they reimagined the Justice League as dinosaurs. It's like a short miniseries, very fun, very graphic, amazing artwork. But if I may recommend one that's slightly different, there was a manga.
Oh, Gone.
Yes, you beat me
Yeah,
to it,
I'm a
Steve.
big Gone fan. I'm a
Yeah,
big Gone
yeah.
fan. Yeah,
By
yeah.
Masashi Tanaka, I believe is the name. I was familiar with Gon because he was a secret playable character in Tekken 3, and he was like one of my favorite characters to pick as a kid.
Oh, cool. I
I
didn't know
learned
that.
Yeah, I learned much later on about the manga, which actually this morning I was looking through some of the pages from there, and I mean that artwork is so
Oh, it's phenomenal.
and just mind-boggling good.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And I grew up loving Tex Avery's cartoons,
yeah,
and if Tex Avery had done a dinosaur comic, it would have been Gone because every
yeah, yeah.
individual episode just builds and builds and builds to this insane over the top climax. I used to do Chicago Con every year,
Hmm.
and had friends there, Stephen Harold, Tim Gagney. They were working with Diamond Comics at the local distribution warehouse in Chicago. And my good friend Larry Martyr, back in those days, Larry and I were good friends. And Larry lived in Chicago with his late wife Corey. Anyway, when I would go to Chicago, they would take me to this amazing shop. I think it was Kodansha, and it was in
Hmm.
a shopping mall outside of Chicago. And I bring it up because there was a little plastic Gone figure.
Oh,
that I really wanted to pick up, but it was for display only. It was not for sale. And I
Tempting.
still pine for that plastic Gone figure, the little orange Allosaurus with the oversized head.
I might have to. I think I've got. I'm gonna track down some of these dinosaur comics you spoke about, but I'm definitely hitting eBay after this and hope to find this Gone display
Okay.
fig. That sounds awesome.
I
Steven, I
won't bid
gotta.
against you. I won't bid against you.
Well, like if I lose, I know it would be you or one of
No,
my ambitious
I'll wait a
listeners.
month.
I
So,
appreciate that, Steve. Steve, I gotta ask, man. How has retirement, quote unquote, been treating you? I mean, does it feel like a true? I know that you've mentioned in the intro that you've still kept a foot in comics with short stories, anthologies, et cetera, et cetera. But is it safe to say, was I accurate in saying that in 1999 that you retired from full-time comics and
I
self-publishing?
retired. Yeah, I retired from the American
Mm,
comic book industry. I mean,
okay.
by 1999, I'd had it. And I won't go into all the particulars, but the implosion of the direct sale market. I had worked for 25 years to get out of work for hire comics,
Yeah.
and then after the implosion of the direct sale market in '96, by '97, it was all over but the tears. And the only work that was really available after that, for me to take on was work for hire, and
Yeah.
I was done with it.
Yeah.
So when I retired, I ended up working for until March of 2005 in the video retail and rental industry full time. I was a shareholder in a video shop called First Run Video in
Mm,
Brattleboro, Vermont. It was one of the few superstores in southern Vermont, and I loved it because I love movies. And um, all the experiences I had had working as a self-publisher in the comics industry and as a publisher from the
hmm,
Taboo years served me very well in the video industry, because the same thing that had just happened in the comics industry began to manifest itself in the video industry.
mm,
And I became part of the New England buying group as part of my employment with First Run Video, and got involved in some pretty amazing closed door meetings with studios like Universal, Warner
wow.
Brothers, HBO. Um, and then in 2005, I made the leap into teaching. I was approached by my friend James Sturm and Michelle Awley, who were about to launch a brand new cartooning college, 2-year program, college level, much like the Joe Kubert School, where I was a member of the first ever class, 76 to 78. And they invited me in to teach. I didn't have a teaching degree, which I thought meant I couldn't do this. But James said, "You've got the work experience. We need
Hmm.
you." It only took a little bit of arm bending. And by that summer, the summer of 2005, when we opened our doors for summer workshops, I was there from day one, and I
Yeah.
stuck with it for 15 years. Um, in a way, it allowed me to do for the next generation of cartoonists what Joe and Muriel Kubert had done
Hmm.
for me and my classmates. Rick Beach, Tom Yates, Kara
Yeah.
Sherman Torino, Ron Zalmi, Tom Mandrake, Jan Dursema. I mean, Ron Randall, all the classmates I had at Kubert School. Prominent among them for me, John Toddleben, who I ended up doing Swamp Thing with. Um, and it was I really felt like, okay, Joe and Muriel did this for us. I now have, the universe has put me in the unique position of being able to do something similar by joining the faculty at the Center for Cartoon Studies. And it was the best thing I could have done with my
Yeah.
life for those 15 years.
Yeah.
I
I've read.
retired from that in 2020,
Hmm.
not because of the pandemic, but because I was 65 years old.
Hmm.
And whatever time I got left on this planet, I wanted to do other stuff.
Hmm.
And as my wife Marjorie often says, ever since I retired from teaching, I've been working harder than I did when I was teaching. So
Wow.
I'm still
Inspiring.
at it. I'm still at it.
Inspiring. I read in an interview somewhere that the way you speak about your time teaching at the center for cartoon studies. I think in one interview you said that it was the best 15 years of like your life, like the experience that you
Oh
got
yeah.
there and what you got to do with the students. I am curious, what did you teach exactly? Like, yeah, what were some of the courses you taught?
Okay. Well, academia always names classes in a manner that is not the way I would have named them. I was teaching comics history for 15 years, but
Oh wow,
it was called Survey of the Drawn Story. That was the name of the class.
that's fancy.
When I started, it was a 1-semester class. It quickly grew into a 2-semester class. So, full first year class, and it was very intensive. They were 3-hour sessions. I prepared 3-hour lectures, and I would hit my students with up to 200 images per lecture.
Wow.
And I was trying to, I mean, even in a full year, academic year, you cannot cover the history of comics, cartooning, and graphic novels. It's, you're like skipping a stone over an ocean. But I gave it my all. I would revamp the program every single year. I had amazing. The students never believed me when I said I learned more from them than they did from me, but it was true. And I would get challenged every year by a couple of students, something I hadn't covered, and I would always try to up my game by folding in new material in the subsequent year. Manny Murphy, a fantastic cartoonist, Manny Murphy. They're out there on Facebook and doing graphic novels that are incredibly important. And Manny really challenged me. I think Manny was part of our 3rd class that came through CCS. And I stepped up my game because Manny called me on, where are the female cartoonists? That's got to be more prominent. And also I began by teaching, co-teaching with James Kachalka, drawing workshop. And that was a co-teaching gig for a number of years. I also worked with the novelist Sarah Stewart Taylor and the poet Peter Money, teaching the senior class. It's a 2-year program, but the second year, the students entirely are focused on their own thesis project or projects, depending on what the student's doing. And it was my job, as a co-teacher of the senior workshop class to get them through their second year and graduate. And herding cats is easier than herding cartoonists, let me tell you. I also got to teach with Alec Longstreth, and Alec Longstreth, he's doing a terrific graphic novel series called Isle of Elsie. It's a crowdfunded project. He just put out, I think his 3rd or 4th volume is about the ship. And Alec and I have remained good friends. In fact, I'm talking to him on Zoom tomorrow.
That's cool.
And, Alec and I think, handle my best years with the students were when Alec and I were co-teaching. As you just quoted, I could not, it is the best 15 years of my professional life. I couldn't have done anything better. I was fortunate in that my 2 kids, my daughter Maya and son Danny, were out of the household, by 2005. And so I could really dedicate myself to the process of teaching. I'll always be their father and parent, but it wasn't the kind of intensive parenting when you're trying to get your teenager through graduation. Instead, now I was responsible for, getting students from age 18 to 63 through their graduation.
Wow.
So,
That sounds inspiring. That's great. And there's a few different directions I want to go with this interview. Obviously, we're going to definitely talk about Tyrant, but on the topic of academia, you briefly brought it up, but I want to emphasize that you were a member of the pioneer class of the Joe Kubert School of Cartoon and Graphic Art, first graduating class in 1978. When you think back at your time at the Kubert School, and I guess really take a step back for anyone that might not know, the Joe Kubert School alumni is stacked when it comes to talent and professionals and cartoonists and artists. I mean, you've got the likes of Amanda Connor, Lee Weeks, Rick Veitch, colorist Matt Hollingsworth, Dave Dorman, Scott Collins. I mean, the list really does go on when you look at the Joe Kubert School alumni. when you think back to your experience being the first graduating class, like, can you describe your experience at the Kubert School? Like, what was a normal day, or is there a I guess what's the most vivid memory you have of that experience at Kubert School?
You know, it was a cartooning monastery for us. I
Hmm.
mean, a lot of us, I was single at the time. Like many of my classmates, there were married classmates, Elaine Heinel, Rick Beach, Betsy Swardlick, you know, a number of my classmates, including the late great Ben Ruiz, who ended up staying on and teaching at the Kubert School
Oh wow.
after graduating. They were married. They had fuller lives than those of us who were there as single budding cartoonist, but you know, it was you ate, slept, eat, and
Hmm.
craft comics. It was just focused on comics, and it was a very monastic experience in that Joe and Muriel, thanks to one of the golden age publishers of comic books, Harry A. Chesler.
Hmm.
Harry Chesler became sort of the godfather of the school, and Harry steered Joe and Muriel, who were living in Dover, New Jersey. That's where they raised their family. Harry steered them to a place called the Baker Mansion, which was in the bedroom community of Dover, but it was this, you know, late 19th century, early 20th century estate with grounds, a swimming pool, you know, gigantic conifer trees in the back that Tom Yates and I and our classmates would go out and climb. Tom was the only one I know who made it to the top of those trees. Um, it was amazing. And we were kind of in an apprenticeship program, some of us. It was set up as a school, an academic setting with classrooms and so on, but the mansion became the be all and end all for us. And during the first year, the reason I referred to an program, during the first year, Joe relocated his drawing studio to the main floor of the Baker Mansion. So our classrooms were across the hall from Joe's studio. And by the time we were into our second year, our main classroom was on the second floor above Joe's studio.
Hmm.
And this gave us uh, something I never would have gotten in any other educational experience, which was we we not just witnessed, but occasionally Joe would let us actually sit in
Oh
if you
wow.
were quiet and didn't distract him, and you could watch him work. And this gave us a one-on-one witness experience of what a working professional in the mid 1970s, what their life was like, their
Hmm.
professional life. We often got glimpses of the personal life because Muriel, his wife, I mean, Muriel ran the school. Her office was right on the back end of the school, and we got to know their kids as well. And it was incredible.
Hmm.
It was a class setup where there were specific classes: drawing workshop, life drawing, storytelling, lettering and production. Joe's program was set up to try to teach us every discipline necessary
Hmm.
to the way comics were made in the 1970s. And this is all pre-digital era. Okay, no
Sure.
internet, no email, but this also means that all the production work of how comics were put together was old school. You were doing physical artwork. You know, there were no Wacom tablets or
Sure.
any of
Sure.
that stuff. It was all physical artwork. And you were going to be delivering finished physical pages to your teacher in the school. And via the work program that Joe set up for after hours, you would be delivering finished paste ups or finished drawn pages to your professional client, which usually was Joe Kubert himself. It was amazing. It was amazing, and it was
Wow.
very intensive. Um, I had saved enough money working for the family grocery store, Bissette's Market, growing up, that I was able to pay for 3 years of college. The 2 years I
Hmm.
spent at Johnson State College in Johnson, Vermont, before the Kubert School opened, and I still had enough money in my savings to pay for my first year at Kubert School. My dad was old school military. You know, he was in 4 branches of the service.
Oh wow.
He agreed to pay my last year of school because I was already going out for job interviews my first year,
Hmm.
right? We were living in Dover, New Jersey. It was a short bus ride to New York City. And on days there weren't classes, weekdays, and during the summer, I was going into New York, hitting up art directors, carrying my portfolio, and so was Rick Beach and Tom Yates and Ron Zalmi and our classmates. Um, so my dad knew I was serious. Like, this is
Yeah.
what I'm going to do with
Yeah.
my life. And so I got to attend the full 2 years. I had just as dedicated and serious classmates who were not able to return for the second year because of cost factors or, family or home factors. It was very intimate. Botter, there were 21 of us year one, and there were 17 of us year two.
Oh, wow.
So it was a very small
Yeah.
class. And that also is why I refer to it in part as an apprenticeship program. We had very close relations with a lot of our instructors. And the instructors, with the exception of Kelly Harris, who at that time was married to DC editor-writer Jack Harris, Kelly Harris, who taught us production, paste up, and design, was a little older than I was at the time. She, I would guess, was mid-20s, late 20s. All the other instructors were Joe's generation of cartoonists. So Lee Eliath, Dick Giordano teaching inking, Hy Eisman, who taught lettering and humor. Hy Eisman is who I have the fondest memories of. Joe, of course. It was amazing. It was incredible. Rick Estrada was also one of our instructors. Rick Estrada approached teaching. He was a Church of Latter-day Saints of Jesus Christ, a Mormon by devotion. So he approached his teaching as we were getting life lessons along with drawing lessons.
Yeah.
And Rick Beach, who did work in underground comics prior to coming to Kubert School, he and his brother Tom Beach did Two-Fisted Zombies for Last Gasp. And I, in particular, would try to take Rick Estrada's lessons and turn them on their head. We were the subversion experts, if you will, in the class. But Rick respected that. Rick Estrada respected that. It didn't piss him off. He ran with it and pushed us harder.
Yeah.
It was amazing. It was amazing.
I can tell just, we're not sitting in person, but I can tell you have such fond memories, and it sounds like an incredible experience. I can only imagine what the experience is like now. I'm sure they fine-tuned it, and I'm sure they have a great staff, but it really sounds like you were part of a kind of once in a lifetime, experience being the inaugural class.
Yeah, it was really unique. There was also, Bill Kelly was a reporter at one of the local newspapers, and he was a friend of Joe's. I became friends with Bill Kelly. But Bill did a movie review column for one of the local New Jersey papers. And Bill would come in, I'd say maybe once a month, and show a feature film on 16 millimeter out of his collection.
Oh, wow.
So even our extracurricular hours were filled with storytelling lessons. There's some nights I will never forget. Watching King Kong with Joe Kubert in the room.
Wow.
Watching The Conqueror Worm with Vincent Price, better known in England under its release title, The Witchfinder General, one of the most intense late 1960s horror films. And Joe came because Bill had recommended it. And watching Joe so wound up by the movie that his hands were fists, and his knuckles were white. We also were lucky in the time we were in Dover because Dover still had an active downtown community. It began to evaporate while we were there. This is during the gas crisis when it was impossible to buy gasoline to gas up your car. The oil crisis. The mid 70s was a really strange time in America. Yeah. Not as strange as it is now.
That's saying something.
At the time, there was still a movie theater in downtown Dover, the Baker Theater. So in the evening, about once a week, a group of us would pool what little money we had and go down to the Baker. And they showed a lot of double bills, a lot of American International double features. So we were seeing, that's where I saw Taxi Driver for the first time with 4 of my classmates,
Nice.
Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. It was a really amazing time to be looking to get our toe into comics because all around us, the comic industry was falling apart.
Yeah.
But it didn't discourage us. Like I remember the metaphor I described, which some of my classmates embraced, was I grew up reading those dinosaur books, kids' books, and many of them ended with the painting of a dinosaur egg being eaten by a little opossum-like mammal. And I felt like, well, we're the mammals, right? And yeah, the comic industry is imploding, but at the same time, new publications like heavy metal were coming out for the first time. So we really believed we would make our way in the world. Discouraging as it was, what was happening at Marvel and DC, we were also seeing new forms spring up. And I one of my fondest memories is two of our classmates, Rick Taylor and Kara Sherman Torino, showing us, excited that these self-published comics were coming out, that they could buy in the local comic shop, Heroes World, in New Jersey. This new comic called Cerebus by this Canadian named Dave Sim, and this new comic called ElfQuest by Wendy and Richard Keeney that was beginning in a strange little black and white anthology called Fantasy Quarterly. Before we were done at Kubert School, ElfQuest was coming out as its own title, and Dave Sim was well into the first year to 2 years of Cerebus. So, that heavy metal hitting the newsstands, we had hope. We had reason to hope, and we weren't irrational and crazy for hoping. It turned out it was a new world opening up, and we got to be part of it.
Well said. I am curious, do you keep up with comics now or the direct market at all? Is there any new creators that you're fond of?
Oh, God. Well, I'm a Junji Ito addict.
Oh, my God, yes.
I follow every English language publication of Junji Ito's work. I do canvas crowdfunding. And so I do kick in on, pun intended, on certain graphic novel projects. There are certain cartoonists whose work I still follow, including people who are friends of mine, like Eddie Campbell, Rick Veitch, certainly, with the self-publishing that Rick's doing using print on demand on Amazon with his Sun Comics imprint, which is carrying on what he began with King Hell Publishing. So yeah, I don't follow what's happening at Marvel and DC. Those have become fringe. That's no longer the mainstream. The mainstream is what's happening at Scholastic. The mainstream is what's happening at Abram Books. The mainstream is imprints like my friend John Jennings has his own black cartoonist imprint at Abrams, and they're putting out phenomenal work.
That's cool.
Some of which John has an active hand in as a creator or co-creator, but he's also shepherded a whole new generation of creators who have come in. So there's a lot, but as a reader, I mean, we could spend thousands of dollars a month just on the reprint volumes of the comics we love. I just got in the mail today the hardcover Lone Wolf and Cub Volume 1. So
Steve, you have phenomenal taste. Like everything you're meant to, Junji Ito, Gone, Lone Wolf and Cubs are some of my favorites. And I'm glad that you're putting us. And to answer your question, yes, I actively avoid Kickstarter now because last year I spent way too much money. I mean, granted, I felt good, like supporting these causes and getting these awesome things. But man, oh man, it is between Kickstarter, the self-publishing route. It is very interesting and awesome to have a direct line to creators, and then Patreon included in a bunch of different platforms. And you mentioned something earlier about, one of the reasons why you retired from American comics was the implosion of the direct market.
Right.
And I guess since we're on the topic of self-publishing and some of the direct market, I am curious to hear your thoughts on the state of the industry, considering that 1999, 96, Diamond becomes kind of the sole distributor. Fast forward to now, it's bankrupt. It's not really a player anymore. You've got Penguin Random House. You've got a flurry of distributors. Lunar. There's one called Alliance. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, what are your thoughts on the state of the industry now versus like then? Like, do you think if there was still a variety of distributors then that you would have continue doing American comics, or would we have seen more of Tyrant past 4 issues?
Oh yeah, my plan with Tyrant was 15 to 20 years. I was going to spend the rest of my life doing my dinosaur comic. I mean, that was my plan, right? And it was viable financially. When I started on Tyrant, there were at least a dozen distributors. Like, we were able to sell our product around the world thanks to Titan Books They had Titan distribution in the UK, and they would. I mean, when I met filmmaker Alejandro Jodorowsky at the Boston Film Festival, and I got to have lunch with Alejandro and his producer Claudio Argento, brother of Dario Argento. And the reason we were getting together is I was going to publish one of his stories, Eyes of the Cat, which was drawn by Jean Giraud, aka Mobius. We were going to publish it in Taboo. I was blown away when I go to meet them at lunch, and Alejandro has already bought issues of Taboo because Titan was distributing the books into France and Belgium, right? So, and there were 2 or 3, Andromeda, Neptune up in Canada. I mean, we were able to sell our books around the world, seriously. When it all imploded and came down to one distributor, you know, that was the end of it. When I was doing Tyrant, my plan was to just do Tyrant. And the way it worked, I won't get into the nuts and bolts of the bookkeeping, but shorthand, my diamond check from an issue of Tyrant paid the entire printing bill. My capital check was pure profit, and I was supporting 2 households at the time. My first wife and I had separated. I was able to pay the entire rent for my home and my wife's home in January of every year.
Wow.
The whole year, I could just pay it, right?
That's insane. Yeah.
And that's because Tyrant cumulatively was selling about 30 to 32,000 copies per issue. And when I say cumulatively, Botter, this means that when I listed Tyrant number 2 coming out, I was allowed to relist Tyrant number 1. And I ended up doing 3 printings of Tyrant number 1, 2 printings of Tyrant 2 and 3, because I would relist the book and my readership was growing incrementally. Yeah. And when Diamond took over, that you couldn't relist your book anymore if you were an independent. Why? Because the exclusives were with DC, Dark Horse, Image, and then Marvel had to jump ship from Heroes World to go with Diamond. And the larger publishers said, we only get to relist. Meaning,
wow, that's some sharky shit right there. Yeah.
And at the time, Larry Marder, who was doing Bean World, and I mentioned Larry earlier in the context of visiting him in Chicago when I would do ChicagoCon. Larry and Dave Sim were the 2 people who really were educating all of us who were self-publishing, Rick Beach, myself. I remember Larry calling me when Marvel went direct with Heroes World, and he described it as, this is Pearl Harbor for independent publishing. Like, this is the beginning of the war. And later, in a different conversation, Larry said, they're killing off the buffalo. You know, we as self-publishers are essentially the Native American tribal publishers, and they are going to kill off what we need to live on and get us on reservations. And that indeed is a metaphor for what happened. And that's part of why I pulled the plug on Tyrant. I had 2 households to keep going. Sure. My first wife, Marlene, and I are still best friends. It was not an acrimonious separation and divorce, but I had to get our teenage kids, you know, through high school and into their adult years. And it was a no-brainer that, okay, I can't self-publish anymore, so I'll redirect my energies to a day job working in the video industry. That was hard. And it was also hard because a lot of my peers in comics acted like I had betrayed comics by stepping away. And for me, I was just being pragmatic. I'm a father. I got to get through this. And I can't count on the direct sale market any longer. And working for publishers was not working out. So switching from freelancing, as I had been doing for 20-something years, to a day job felt good to get a paycheck every Friday, let me tell you.
Yeah, I feel you on that.
But I was still creative. I still illustrated at least 1 novel or short story book per year for boutique horror publishers like Cemetery Dance. They do high-end hardcovers, slipcases, and all that. And I also began writing a weekly column for our local newspapers in New England called Video Views. I would review all the new videos that were out that week. So I still kept active writing and drawing. I just wasn't doing it in the comic book industry anymore.
Got it. Well, you know, your story, I think, puts a spotlight, for better or worse, about the aspect of comics that really intrigues me, where I feel like comic books, especially when we're talking like direct market, comic shops, etc., this Venn diagram between like art and commerce. I think, you know, your story is right there in the middle. It spotlights, you know, the business side that I think sometimes like casual fans don't really think of. I think it also puts a spotlight on the livelihood and the reality of the people, of the artists and creators who are putting their, like I say in the intro every time, their blood, sweat, and tears into making them, and how sometimes unjust it can be in terms of like compensation and, you know, opportunity.
Page rates are lower now than they were in the 1980s, right?
Hell, you
I get
mentioned.
approached all the time by different publishers asking
Mhm.
me to do a cover or a story, and it's really easy to say no when I get more for a sketch that
Hmm.
I still own the copyright to than to
Yeah.
do a work for hire Godzilla cover, for
Hmm.
instance. And on the other hand, though, I mean, we had students who came into CCS already making excellent livings by using Patreon, by doing crowdfunding,
Yeah.
by having built a huge following online
Hmm.
with online comics, digital
Sure.
comics, and you know, doing print collections of their work. And a number of the a lot of our alum from CCS are working professionally in the industry, including people who are working now as editors at some of these big houses, and many who are graphic novelists. But the industry has really shifted, right? We're in a era now where the contracts being offered for graphic novels do not pay much more than the page rates we used to get at DC
Hmm.
when I was getting $64 a page doing Swamp Thing pencils, you know,
Hmm.
um, which fans sort of don't believe. I really bristle when I see fans, so-called fans, posting if there's any kind of controversy revolving around a reprint or a new movie adaptation. If anyone speaks up saying, "Well, what about the creators?" and when there's this corporate aspect to fandom where they're like, "Well, they got paid." Well, you know, the guy who wrote Ghost Rider got $17 a page in the 70s when he created Ghost Rider for Marvel Comics. That's not getting paid for your time.
Yeah.
And I also approach that with
Ridiculous.
not just attitude, but the fact that John Toddleben, Rick Beach, and myself, we still get quarterly royalties from John Constantine,
Hmm.
Hellblazer. We still get quarterly royalties from the reprints of our Swamp Thing work. And that has allowed us to continue having creative lives. Um, Social Security isn't going to cut it when you're a cartoonist. Let me tell you,
Sure.
you still have to pay in all your life with your taxes. You do get Social Security, but you know, DC has honored the contracts that they had with us. In fact, during Paul Levitt's and Jeanette Kahn's regime at DC, they improved our royalty plan.
Hmm.
And anytime John Constantine pops up in a video game or an animated film, we get a little piece of that.
There
And
you
a
go,
little
as you
piece of
deserve.
that adds up when you're in your
Absolutely.
70s, and every quarter, manna from heaven shows up because of work we did back in the 1980s when we were younger, and able to do that kind of carry that kind of workload.
Hey, interesting stuff. I think grim, but also inspiring in some cases. I think the inspiring part being that we're highlighting the state of the industry now and how there's so many avenues for creators who go direct to fans, which brings us to the new Kickstarter campaign that is bringing Tyrant back in all of its glory, and actually even like maybe even extra glory, because if I'm to understand correctly, the Kickstarter, which launches sometime in March, is what I'm told,
Yeah.
early March. We'll see. You guys are reproducing Tyrant. There's two versions being offered, bonus content, etc. But I want to start from take a step back and talk about the origin. So, Lighthouse Press is the company that is bringing this project to life, that has worked with you. Chris Stevens is the founder and publisher of said Lighthouse Press. What do you remember from your first meeting with him about bringing Tyrant back in this, through this campaign, through this prestige format?
I knew Chris already before he called me because I had contributed, oddly enough, a Tyrant one pager
Oh
to
wow.
one of Chris Stevens' early crowdfunding projects, Dream a Little Dream, which was Winsor McKay's Little Nemo, new one pagers in the Sunday Comics format by contemporary cartoonists doing their homage or honoring Winsor McCay's Little Nemo. And I did a piece called Tyrant in Slumberland. And it was actually a reprint. It was a piece I had done for one of the CCS student anthologies called Sundays. There was a class one year and an anthology called Sundays where all the students that contributed did their piece as a full-size Sunday page, that giant format from the early 1900s. And so I did the Tyrant piece for them. And when Chris Stevens heard from Jim Rugg, who's the designer on this Tyrant project that's about to be crowdfunded, I didn't know this at the time. Jim Rugg is the one who said to Chris Stevens, you know, Steve Bissette did a Little Nemo riff with his character Tyrant. And Chris invited me in on Dream a Little Dream. And it was a single phone call, but Chris honored everything he told me. Everything he told me was going to happen, right? There was no mucking about. The pay is what he said it was. The book came out the way he said it would. Everything was on the up and up. And then years later, he approached me again when he was involved in packaging a project that was crowdfunded called The Golem of Venice Beach. There were 2 volumes in all, and I contributed to the first volume. And again, you know, Chris approached me. There was a push me, pull you, because I wasn't sure I wanted to be involved. But I ended up doing 2 pages for it, fully painted black and white pages. And everything Chris said was going to happen. They honored everything. So when Chris approached me about collecting Tyrant, and he told me he was approaching another one of my peers, whose name I won't mention because I don't think they've announced the project as yet. So I shouldn't spill any beans on that. I was interested. My family and I were going through a real health crisis at the time. Our son, Michael, at age 45, father of 5, had his own business, happily married, suffered from brain cancer, and it took his life. And it was a really hard year and a half.
I'm sorry.
So I kind of, I had to put Chris off. I said, you know, I'm interested, but I can't focus on anything right now except my family and what's happening with my family. During that time, though, I started the process of going through my flat files and stacks of artwork. I have over 50 years of artwork here in my studio. And I collated almost all the pages of Tyrant. I had never sold any. I had never thrown anything out. I had everything. And after our son Mike died, it took a few months to even want to wake up in the morning. But I reached out to Chris and said, okay, we can start scanning now. If we can figure out the nuts and bolts of this, I've got almost all the original art. There's 3 pages that haven't turned up yet, but everything else is here.
Wow.
And that includes all the back pages in Tyrant as well, all the text pages and everything. We pulled the project together. And my wish list, Chris asked me, you know, was there anyone I wanted to have involved? And my wish was to have Jim Rugg design the book, because I'm a big fan of Jim's work that he's done as a self-publisher and cartoonist. Street
incredible.
Angel. I not only buy Street Angel for myself. Whenever there's a new Street Angel, I buy a second copy that Jim personalizes to our daughter Maya, because Maya loves Street Angel too, and she's in her 40s now, right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
And Jim was on board with it. And Sean Michael Robinson jumped on to work with the production. Sean Michael is one of the experts in working with the digital format, how to get the most out of scanned artwork, and how it should be prepared for the best printing, and so on and so forth. And so we're doing it. Now, I mentioned to you earlier in our conversation, the CCS students, I watched every year as 1 to 5 students were crowdfunded. So I learned by watching, right? And by conversations with them, how crowdfunding worked. And the beauty of crowdfunding, we only touched on, I think right now we're in a true golden age. The best comics and graphic novels I've ever read in my life are happening right now, right? And anything goes. Like, it's no longer controlled by this little small group of gatekeepers the way it was in the mid-70s when I was trying to get into the field. You had to clear it with an art director, an editor. There is some great work being done, because with crowdfunding, with Patreon, with all these platforms and venues, creators are doing some of the best work I've ever seen in the field. So I understood enough about crowdfunding that, and also having contributed to Dream a Little Dream and then the Golem of Venice, I saw a bit more how it worked. And this is going to be a steep learning curve for me, Botter, going through the experience of what we're going to be doing with Tyrant.
Yeah.
But it consolidates into a single period of time, in this case, 30 days, everything we used to have to do over months, right?
Yeah.
When I did Tyrant #1, I had to write and draw it. I had to advertise and promote it. I had to get it listed in the Diamond and Capital and the other distributor catalogs. Those catalogs went to the consumer base, who then had to decide, a customer like you or I going in the comic shop, oh, 4 months from now, I think I want to read this comic, right?
Yeah.
And place my pre-order and then wait 4 months. And for someone who's self-publishing, that creates a dilemma too. Like, who am I advertising my work to when? Like, when do I promote Tyrant #1? Am I promoting it to the retailers, which we could do back then at the distributor trade shows? Am I promoting it to the end buyer? And in that case, am I promoting it when it's in the catalogs so that they'll pre-order it? Or am I advertising it when it's actually in the shops? Will it even be in the shops if I haven't promoted it to both the retail community and the potential reader community? All of that now happens in 30 days. Crowdfunding allows you to package, promote, distribute, because you're selling to the end user. So you're distributing your work as well. And the printing is subsidized by what you take in with the crowdfunding, or you pull the plug because you didn't raise enough money. And that's educational as well and reduces your risk. The biggest risk I've seen remaining with crowdfunding, Botter, is shipping, right?
Yeah.
Every headache I've
Has to
seen
make or break
a
it.
student or an alum or a fellow teacher at CCS struggle with is, they crowdfund with a certain dollar figure in mind, and then postage and shipping goes up. I'm getting hit with questions weekly now from people overseas. Like, they want to go in on the Tyrant crowdfunder, but will they be able to get the product shipped to them? And we don't have an answer for them yet, right? Because we don't know if there's going to be 16 new tariffs between the time you and I started this conversation and the end of the crowdfunding venue comes up. So that's the big, that's one of the big risk factors I still see with it.
But I mean, look, definitely a significant risk to take to keep in mind. But you named so many positives when it comes to something like
this is right.
Yeah.
I am so positive about this current era we're in. I didn't mean to be discouraging
No.
anybody.
I actually was gonna compliment you, Steve, that I find your perspective and outlook on comics, with it being so positive, very refreshing. And I say this with full respect, that I don't think that's always the case for veteran comic creators. It's sometimes it feels just a little more negative.
Well, they're looking at Marvel and DC still as mainstream. And let's face it, when I saw the New Yorker magazine have Robert Crumb's Genesis on the cover and it was previewed in New Yorker, if I needed a landmark, that was it. It's like, okay, that's the new mainstream.
That's a good point,
right?
yeah.
The mainstream has shifted. And also, having grandkids, they get their graphic novels via the Scholastic book fairs in the schools.
Oh, yeah.
Scholastic is the largest publisher of graphic novels in North America right now. And they're best-selling creators, and they are doing great graphic novels, right? That's the mainstream. Manga is the mainstream. If I go into, if I'm fortunate enough to be in a community where there's still a chain bookstore, they're few and far between up here in New England, the manga section is larger than the graphic novel section, right? So, and, manga began in the United States with, Leonard Rifus with the underground comic scene putting out with his Educomic reprint, Barefoot Gen, the Hiroshima autobiography. And, that was when Americans didn't even know what manga meant. If you said the word manga, they had no idea what you were talking about. Was that one of Godzilla's guest monsters in the Toho movies? Now manga is huge. That's the mainstream. DC and Marvel are now the fringe. That's the fringe of comic publishing. And again, the misperception, I mean, for people my age, I'm about to turn 71. Most of the creators of my generation are still looking at that as the mainstream. And of course you feel bleak about comics if you're looking at, I
That's
mean,
a
I
good point.
get the royalty reports. I see what Constantine sells, as a digital comic and any print.
Mm-hmm.
It ain't much, right?
Yeah.
Um, the mainstream is going great guns, and crowdfunding is part of that new mainstream because a lot of people are only reading their comics online with digital comics on this screen,
Mm-hmm.
or getting their print comics via their favorite digital comics coming out in print edition or via
Yeah.
crowdfunding. Just, this is how the marketplaces change and shift.
No, it's a fair assessment. I want to talk about, with all this talk about Kickstarter, I want to talk about some of the bonus content,
Oh
bonus
yeah,
art that's going to be included in these deluxe editions of Tyrant. I am to understand that there's two versions that'll be. There's two versions that'll be available. There's going to be an oversized hardcover with 100+ pages, which is already like wow.
that's
And then
the
there's a
artist
second,
edition, right?
and
That's the
then
artist
yeah,
edition.
okay,
Okay, and
artist
that's
edition.
all the original art, and
Mhm.
you're going to be getting it the size of my original art.
Oh,
Okay,
that's incredible. So we're
the
talking.
image
Wait, wait.
area,
So
the image area I drew in was 10 by 15 plus the bleed, about an inch on all sides. So that's going to be a massive hardcover book.
oh, okay. Maybe I glossed over that. I did not know it was going to be that size. That's going to be insane. As someone that just read, I was able to, big shout out to, once again, Sean. He sent me a preview copy. I think it only contained issue 1, and I read it on whatever, our standard size iPad, and I'm blown away by just that. So you're telling me that, you guys are putting out 2 oversized volumes of close to 10 by 15?
Well, the one volume is the artist edition. That's the one
Okay.
that's the size of the full.
Okay.
Then
Okay.
there's the second book is there. Chris and Jim are using the term the complete Tyrant, and what that is in a more accessible trade
Okay.
paperback format.
Good enough.
Okay, closer to the size of the kind of trades you have behind you, right? Um, Hardcover omnibus edition sort of
Sure.
format. And
Got
what
it.
that's going to have is everything that's in the artist edition, all the original art scanned from the original art pages, plus all the back matter from all 4 issues of Tyrant, right? Meaning the
Mhm.
text pages, the letters pages, the
Sure.
articles I wrote, the Mark Martin's terrific one-page Bless the Beast, which appeared in every issue in the inside back cover. And we have scanned almost every dinosaur comic, anything I ever had a hand in, starting with the one pager I contributed to my Joe Kubert School publication Manticore, which was kind of our yearbook, year 1.
Huh.
We each did a one-page comic. I did a piece called Dark Time. It was a poem that was essentially a love letter from a caveman to his mate.
That's cool.
And everything since then, including fair use laws, I made the call. We're going to include a page or two from, stories I did for other publishers, including, a page of my Ambush Bug that I did with Keith Giffen, Robert
Mhm.
Lauren Fleming, and Bob Oxner, who inked my pencils. I did a 4-page parody of The War That Time Forgot, that Star Spangled War story comic I mentioned to
Yeah.
you. That was one of my favorite dinosaur comics. So you are going to also see my story notes.
Hmm.
Um, there's new articles that are going to be in the complete edition, including text essays by Rick Veitch, by my good friend Dr. Michael Ryan, who was the paleontologist who was my primary advisor and point person with the paleontological community, because my goal was to make Tyrant as accurate as possible,
Mhm.
given the state of the paleontology back in the mid 1990s. Of course, everything's changed a lot. I do take comfort in the fact that Michael Ryan keeps telling me T-Rex did not have feathers. So please, folks, don't go there.
Oh, good to know. Good. Hey,
Yeah,
man,
yeah, good to know.
and I guess I want to hear, like, what was the genesis for your love of dinosaurs? Because You brought up wanting to make Tyrant scientifically accurate, and I mean it's been what over 20 years since then, and I can only imagine how much the science has changed.
Oh, it's
But
changed tremendously. Yeah.
but reading, like I said, the first issue last night, not only was I blown away by your pencil work, but the hand drawn lettering is incredible. I think the pacing, but then also the way you characterize these different dinosaurs, from like the egg sucker to the elder to the T-Rex that's giving birth. It's like, man, this guy, like your passion for dinosaurs and paleontology really shines through to this. And I guess I want to know, like, where did your love of dinosaurs come from? And what was the catalyst to write an epic comic book about the life of a T-Rex?
You know, you're going to laugh, and I'm not blowing sunshine up anybody's butt here, but it was, well, I never outgrew a love for dinosaurs. Like all little kids, I fell in love with dinosaurs.
Sure.
I remember sitting in my mom's lap and, you know, the little golden book of dinosaurs. Mom couldn't pronounce the dinosaur names. I could. So
I
she
still
would
can't.
read everything around the dinosaur's name, and then I would say the dinosaur's name. So
Oh.
I learned to read on my mother's lap with dinosaur books, and I never outgrew it. And I always wanted to do a dinosaur comic. The When I was 4 years old, there was a comic book that came out from Classics Illustrated. They had a 25-cent square bound, you know, comic book, floppy format, but with a square binding because it was 100 pages or more. And they had a series called The World Around Us, and every issue was dedicated to a different subject. World around us, horses. World around us, the Civil War. World around us, Jesus, the story of Jesus, right? They did one on prehistoric animals, and it came out in 1959. I was 4 years old. I was with my mom. We went into Towns Market, this little tobacco and convenience store in Essex Junction, Vermont, where we lived at the time. And there it was on the spinner rack with a Tyrannosaurus Rex and a Triceratops fighting on the front cover. And of course, little Stevie wanted it. My mom bought it for me. And I wore the comic out, copying the pages.
Wow.
Okay. The pages were falling apart because I was drawing from them. From that point in time, Botter, I wanted to read a comic that was just the story of a dinosaur, and nobody ever did it, right? Every dinosaur comic I named to you is an adventure comic with human beings in it. They're traveling to a lost world.
Sure.
They're in a time machine, Rip Hunter Time Master. They're traveling to another planet where there's there was always this science fictional construct. And I always thought like that was in the way. Like I just wanna read a comic about a dinosaur that's the equivalent of the books I loved as a kid that were about dogs, right? Big Red, the Disney movie. Disney always had a dog movie every year. Big Red, Savage Sam, Old Yeller. Books like Black Beauty. Books like Wild Animals I Have Known by Ernest Thomas Seton, which were collections of short stories just about animals, a rabbit, a wolf, a moose. That's what I wanted to do with comics. And as I got older and I entered the comic book field, anytime I pitched that I wanted to do dinosaur comics, it always was thrown back to me that there had to be this construct, right? And one, for instance, I'll give you is after Swamp Thing, I got approached by a number of publishers. Like they wanted John Totleben, they wanted Steve Bissette, they wanted Rick Veitch. We all suddenly had opportunities that were closed doors to us before we did our run on Swamp Thing. And I would always say, I'd like to do a dinosaur comic. And I would be given sometimes full scripts. And let's say it's a 22-page issue. It would be 15 pages of drawing shit I hate. Okay? Cars, boats, tanks, whatever. And people in rooms talking, and 5 pages of dinosaurs. That was not my idea.
Sure.
And the real impetus for me, and hearing you describe it the way you did from reading Tyrant 1, I wanted to put you, the reader, in the head of a dinosaur. I wanted you to experience the world they lived in the way they lived it. As best I could, I was not going to anthropomorphize these creatures. And one of the reasons I did it in comics instead of as a novel or a series of short stories is in a short story or novel, I have to name that dinosaur. And if it's the scientific name, it's a Latin name. And your eye is going to stop dead right there. Or I have to describe it. Or I have to give it a name, like The Land Before Time, where there's Sarah, the Ceratops, and Terry, the
Littlefoot,
pterodactyl.
yeah.
I didn't want to do that. In comics, I can show you these creatures. And with the exception of Eggsucker, who I only named because I wanted you to know he's going after the nest, right? I wanted to plant that thought in your head from issue 1.
Yeah.
There's no names for these creatures. I just show them to you. And I can use my writing to put you as fully as I possibly can in the experience of their lives. And that was really my goal. And even as I named earlier, Ricardo Delgado's magnificent series, Age of Reptiles, Ricardo doesn't do any writing. It's all visual, right? And it's wonderful. Every one of his graphic novels, collected editions, are wonderful tapestries of prehistoric life, full of action, a lot like Gone, right? But there's no word balloons or captions in Gone. It's all visual narrative, and I love that. But if you remove the element of writing, you're leaving out an entire set of tools to place the reader more fully in the experience of that story. So I was intent on, to the best of my ability, doing that. And I got to work with some of the best writers in comics during my career. You know, Bob Kanigher when I was doing backup stories for Sergeant Rock. Archie Goodwin was an editor I got to work with a couple of times at Epic Illustrated. Alan Moore on the Saga of the Swamp Thing. I learned so much from the first Alan Moore script I ever read. And then to get to work with Alan's scripts issue after issue and to become friends with Alan for a decade, I learned so much. And I learned a great deal from all the animal books I read as a kid, you know, even Bambi and Perry, the little squirrel. I mean, there were all these books. It was a genre when we were kids of animal books. And when I was a kid, there were animal comics about it, you know. On the newsstand, there was Hi-Yo Silver about the Lone Ranger's horse.
Yeah.
And Black Beauty. Trigger, you know, Roy Rogers' horse had his own comic. So I grew up with you know, Lassie comics and stuff. I grew up with these dog and horse comics, and it's like, well, this is great, but there should be a dinosaur comic like this.
Yeah.
So
Well, look,
I ended up having to make it myself.
well, look, I know I did the math. I think I'm 32 years late, but mission accomplished, good sir. Like I said, Tyrant, at least one was amazing. I can't wait to check out the Kickstarter and find these other issues. I'm glad you brought up the writing too, because that was a credit I wanted to give you. Is that there is such a poeticness to the way that you write and describe the scenery and how it juxtaposes with the art. My favorite page out of that entire first issue is the one where the mama T-Rex is taking a look at her eggs and has this beautiful existential like description about like, you know, her mating, you know, giving birth, and how she sees, you know, the her mate and then these eggs as not just like meat to consume, but like she can't even quite describe like the feeling. I don't know, it was a very beautiful and existential issue, and yeah, your writing is fantastic.
You know, I was going to carry that through. I had worked out Tyrant's entire life story. I mean, my plan was to really do it from birth to death. And one of the issues I really wanted to do was there was going to be a story where teenage Tyrant runs into his aging mother
Oh
and
wow.
kills her
Oh
because
wow. I wasn't expecting that turn.
but she knows it's him because she recognizes the smell. So that was going to be a tough issue to write because I was going to try to communicate the sacrifice of a parent who willingly does not defend herself because she knows she will provide flesh to her son that will allow him to survive the natural cataclysm that the story revolved around.
That
I was really going to try to get into, you know, I believe that animals, I believe everything on this planet has as full lives as we have. But we as human beings are so egotistical and egocentric. And we only see animals. I mean, think about it. When do you see a wild animal? When you're driving and it's by the side of the road, right? Or if we see them in a domesticated environment, a zoo,
or a
right?
hike or something, yeah.
A hike or something, right? But growing up in rural Vermont, you know, I now and again had experiences that really brought to life for me that animals have full emotional lives that are completely alien to us, and that also informs everything I was trying to do with Tyrant. There's an entire issue of Tyrant that you haven't read yet. What became Tyrant #3 and takes place entirely, whole issue, inside the egg.
Oh, I've heard about
Because
this
an
one.
egg is a life form in and of itself. It's its own contained ecosystem. And I crash coursed on bird and reptile embryology, and I was very fortunate that my friend Dr. Michael Ryan alerted me that there was a brand new hardcover book about to be published, the first book by paleontologists about dinosaur eggs. And I had to rewrite and redraw 2/3 of the issue when I got
Wow,
my hands on that book, because
that's
it
commitment.
changed everything
Hmm.
about my understanding of how dinosaur eggs were different from bird eggs and different from reptile and amphibian eggs. And I reworked the issue around that. So to me, the environment is as much a character. The environments that Tyrant's mother lays that egg in, the environment that Tyrant grows up in, from the egg to when he leaves the nest, those are just as much characters as these creatures are. And I want you to experience that as a reader. I only got to make it to the point where Tyrant's egg hatched. um, if things go
Yeah.
well with the crowdfunder and my health
I was,
holds up, maybe I'll get to do more. We'll see. But
I was just about to add, I'm glad you answered that, because I feel like we're talking about all of these great means to get your story out there direct to fans. I just think this is a documentary or a movie waiting to happen. Like you retired from the comic industry because of all of the bullshit with direct market and Diamond, etc. Now you're coming back, with this Kickstarter. I can only hope that good things continue, that we get more Tyrant out of this.
well,
I
we'll
hope you
see what happens. If
sure.
nothing else, you will have the collected Tyrant of
Good.
what existed in the mid-90s.
Because
And
it's not easy to find those issues. Steve, I want to get into before I forget, I want to get into a segment of the show that I love doing when I have great guests like yourself. This segment that we're getting into is called the Short Box Friends and Family segment. It is sponsored by my local comic shop, Gotham City Limit Comic Shop. It's not only my local comic shop, but it's also Jacksonville's premier shop for comics, toys, collectibles, and more. It's located in real life on Southside Boulevard, or you can go on GothamCityLimit.com. The first, and I guess I should explain. This segment is where I shut up for a minute and let someone else ask the questions.
oh yeah, bring them on.
I reached out to two different individuals to submit a question for you, and both were very hyped to send one in. The first voicemail that we're going to hear comes from the owner of said local comic shop. His name is Ben Kingsbury, and he owns Gotham City Limit, and he was excited to send you something. So here's his voicemail.
Hey, Steven. Ben K from Gotham City Limit, a comic shop down here in sunny Jacksonville, Florida. Thanks so much for taking some time to chat today. So you're very well known for your work on Swamp Thing. You basically changed Swamp Thing from a campy monster into a deep spiritual thing, eco-horror before anyone called it that. But from doing my research, it seems you're a bit of a film nut as well. Blur Reviews, Green Monster Cinema, etc. So if Swamp Thing got a Cronenberg-style remake tomorrow, who would you tag to direct it? Well, I'll leave you here to answer. Thank you so much for everything you do. We literally couldn't do it without you. And remember, Short Box Nation, we'll always take it to the limit. Peace.
Big shout outs to Ben.
Hey, Ben K, more power to you and more power to your shop. Anybody keeping a comic shop going these days is a hero to me.
Damn
so,
right.
well, here's my answer. And I'm not going to Google the name, but one of the best movies I saw in the year 2025, and I recommend it to everybody, is a movie called Good Boy. And it's a film that was made by a couple who built the film around their dog. And it took them years to make the movie because the dog didn't know it was in a movie. This was not a trained dog working, as a professional in the entertainment industry. And the brilliance of Good Boy is that it tells essentially a haunted house story. It's essentially a haunted house story, but it's also a meditation on death and what is it that we leave behind in a place where we die. And the dog sees things that people don't see. Now, anyone who's had a pet knows, right? Whether it's a dog or a cat, man, they look at parts of the room where we don't see anything,
Yeah, it's giving me
And
shivers
this
right
is
now.
a
Goosebumps.
film that puts you in the dog's head. And so my choice for a director for a Swamp Thing film would be the couple that made Good Boy. I would love to see what they might do with the whole premise of Swamp Thing. But you used the word Cronenbergian. So obviously, I'd most like to see Brandon Cronenberg, his son, who's made 3 very good movies and 1 great film. My second choice would be Brandon Cronenberg. He may not care at all about Swamp Thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I also just saw a terrific film called Train Dreams. Very immersive film. Has nothing to do with monsters. It's about a lonely man who's a logger in the 20th century and his life story. And it was such an immersive film. It puts you in nature for the duration of the running time. So that director would be my third choice. But again, I don't know if he has any predilection or care about Swamp Thing or the genre.
I just looked up a Good Boy for anyone curious. One, I'm definitely going to watch this based on your cosign. But for anyone interested, it was directed by someone by the name of Ben Lowenberg. If you were curious,
there you go. And it's a great film. Great.
I'm
film.
gonna check it out. If I may throw in my, because I got to hear the voicemail and it's just been kind of on my mind as well. But the first name that popped up in my head for someone to play Swamp Thing, Michael Shannon. I think my mind went to The Shape of Water. I know that
I
he
love
did
The Shape of Water. I mean,
Me too.
Guillermo del Toro would be the filmmaker to do Swamp Thing.
Absolutely.
Let's face it.
Yeah.
Let's face it.
I know Doug Jones plays Amphibian Man. I think he'd be a great Swamp Thing. But something about Michael Shannon's intensity, and I know this is a stupid joke, but also his eyebrow game is something fierce.
Oh, yeah.
I think him and Swamp Thing have that in common.
Well, I mean, look what Ron Perlman did with Hellboy.
Yeah,
you know? Ron Perlman is Hellboy, and I do like the other Hellboy movies.
Sure.
If you haven't seen the most recent one, The Crooked Man, it is a great film. It didn't play theatrically in America, but it's out on Blu-ray.
Okay.
It is a great Hellboy movie, and they capture in that the spirit and the look of Mike Mignola and Richard Corbin's collaboration on that Hellboy piece. But yeah, I can see where you're going with Michael Shannon.
Yeah.
He's one of my favorite actors.
Hell
he was
yeah.
a mage in Nuremberg, which also was a great
yeah.
film from this past year.
All right, Steve, I got so that was Ben Kingsbury. I got one more voicemail from you for you, and I think you'll really appreciate this one because we've kind of mentioned his name a few times. Here he is.
Hey, Steve, this is Jim Rugg. I wanted to ask you about copyright. It's something that you obviously take very seriously. We see it in your interaction with other artists in anthologies like Taboo that you put together. I'm curious when copyright became something you were aware of, and if you have a message to students or young cartoonists today about its importance and how to protect their copyrights. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Oh my God, great question. I became aware of copyrights as a reader of underground comics. When I was a high school student at Harvard Union High School, my art teacher, who I'm still friends with, Bill Cappy. Thank you, Bill. If you're out there listening or watching, Bill put into my hands something in a brown paper bag and said, "You can't tell anyone you got this from me." Now I'm telling the whole world I got it from you, Bill. And it was an issue of Zap, Robert Crumb's Zap. And this is when it was just Crumb. It was either Zap 0 or Zap number 1. And it blew my mind. It's what made me decide comics was the media for me to work in, was that issue that Bill gave me of Zap. And so I became an obsessive underground comics reader. Now, growing up in rural Vermont, especially 1969, 1970, you might think it was impossible to find underground comics. Not true. Because of the counterculture, the hippie movement, and the fact that there were communes around northern Vermont, there were head shops around northern Vermont. Head shops are where you could buy paraphernalia, rolling papers, pipes, hookahs, and so on. And within driving distance of where I lived at the time in Colbyville, Vermont, there were 3 venues where I could buy underground comics right off racks. Little Professor Bookstore on Church Street in Burlington, which was the main retail drag in Burlington, the closest thing we have to a city in Vermont. The Vermont Bookstore in Waitsfield, Vermont. And there was a head shop called the Land of Oz in Burlington that also sold underground comic. And after my first couple of underground comic purchases, I found the name of Bud Plant, and I ordered the Bud Plant catalog out of California, and I began buying every comic that Bud Plant listed. Like, I just devoured every underground comic. And that's where I learned about copyright, because all the mainstream 4-color comics I'd been buying and reading since I was a little kid, you know, I was obsessive enough that I read the indicia, and they were all owned by the companies, right? Copyright Marvel Comics, copyright trademark DC Comics, National Periodicals originally, et cetera, et cetera. The underground comics had the little C in the circle and the year and the artist's name or the writer artist team. And I went, what's this? And I learned about copyright from the underground comics. And I realized from the interviews I read in some of the underground comic fanzines like Promethean Enterprises, which was also published and edited by Bud Plant, some of the artists talk very openly there about owning their own work. And that their ownership of the work was very important to their ability to make a living, and also the fact that they could control where their work went. And when you were buying underground comics, it was interesting because you would see Robert Crumb had characters in comics that he did, but they were all from different publishers. Print Mint didn't own Mr. Natural, and Ripoff Press didn't own Mr. Natural. Robert Crumb owned Mr. Natural and Fritz the Cat and all his cast of characters. So they could appear in any comic he did for any publisher. And that's where I realized the power of copyright in the comics industry. Later, once I went to the Kubert School, I learned more, right? Including the fact that in our classroom conversations, this was often a hot button topic. Right to the last Saturday afternoon I got to spend with Joe Kubert in my life, when Joe was still alive and vital. Joe and I did a conversation on tape. I brought a cassette recorder, and with Joe's permission, I recorded it. We were still arguing about work for hire and copyright, right? Because to Joe, the companies owning the work was very important. That made sense to him. To me, the creator owning the copyright and trademark was important. I'll also point out here for your listeners who don't know, copyright, the little C in the circle in the year, indicates who owns the expression of that idea, right? You cannot copyright an idea. You can only copyright the expression of that idea, meaning the song you wrote, the sculpture you made, the photograph you took, or in the case of the conversation Botter and I are having, the comics stories that you make, the covers you draw. And copyright only protects the expression of the idea, the story or the drawing. And ever since they changed copyright law in 1977, you don't have to register your idea with the Library of Congress to protect your copyright. That copyright is your property the moment your pen leaves the paper and you go, this is a finished drawing or this is a finished story. It's your property. But you want to register your copyright with the Library of Congress if you're publishing it, because if you ever have to defend your work legally, you only can win money if you registered your copyright. You can protect your copyright and it's still your property, but you'll have to pay your own legal bills and you won't get damages. Got it? Now, trademark is something different altogether. Trademark, the TM or the R in the circle, I registered the trademark S.R. Bissette's Tyrant. Trademark is your brand, okay? And here's how I'll make it clear to you. DC Comics owns the trademark to Swamp Thing. Nobody else can do Swamp Thing. And that's why they stick with only certain logos, because that's their brand. You're trademarking that brand. It's the same as the trademark that Nabisco has on Oreo, right? They don't own the idea of 2 chocolate wafers with a white cream in the middle. You all know that. But they own Oreos. Sure. And the name Oreo is their trademark brand. So if you create a comics character, Botter, let's say you come up with a character called Lamprey Boy. Well, Lamprey Boy, when you write and draw the story, you will own the copyright on your drawings and on your comic story. But if you want to protect Lamprey Boy so that nobody else can do Lamprey Boy or Lamprey Girl, you want to trademark your logo, Lamprey Boy. And if you're going to do it for the rest of your life, you may want to pay the money involved and go through the legal process of registering that trademark, which gives you additional protections, but also has a certain onus. You have to renew your trademark regularly, and that costs money. When Peter Laird and Kevin Eastman had great success with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, their company, Mirage Studios, had to trademark Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles all around the world. Right?
Yes, yeah.
And that
So many
meant a
bootlegs.
legal cost and a legal process in every country on planet Earth, because they had to protect the turtles as a property. But anytime they did a turtle drawing, as soon as it left their board and when it's done,
Copyrighted.
they owned the copyright on their drawing. But they couldn't protect their brand unless they did the trademark. I hope this makes sense to everybody.
Stephen, no, that was probably the most clear, concise way I've ever heard that explained. I know that can get very confusing when you get into the weeds of it, but that was excellently said. And I want to give Jim Rugg a shout out for that thoughtful question. That was I feel like I need to insert the more you know sound effect right here.
Jim Rugg's a very thoughtful guy.
Yes.
So
and real quick, I want to on the topic of Jim Rugg, you mentioned that he's involved with the project in the sense of he's the editor, he's helping compile this. But I've read somewhere, if I'm not mistaken, a Publishers Weekly article talking about the Kickstarter, that it was you were maybe a little hesitant about reproducing Tyrant, but the popularity due to there was a cartoonist kayfabe video where they talked about
it was
Tyrant.
all thanks to Jim and Ed. Yeah. Jim Rugg and Ed Piskor were the two when they did that comics kayfabe where they sat down and went through all 4 issues, page by page.
Yeah.
And I watched that. I mean, people immediately were emailing me the link saying, "Steve, you got to see this." And it wasn't an ego boot. It was the fact that both Jim and Rugg went, I'm paraphrasing, "Steve, we know you didn't finish it the way you wanted to finish it, but this is a complete read. This needs to be in print again. This needs to be presented to a new generation," I took that to heart. Jim and Ed, like you, Botter, are the new generation. And when I was hearing loud and clear from this current generation, this needs to be back in print, I was listening.
Damn.
Okay. And, a lot of my freelance work these days is for Blu-ray and 4K labels. I do a lot of bonus features for the weirdest movies out there, right? And I love the fact that movies I saw at the drive-in when I was a teenager. I used to love Italian horror movies, right? Mario Bava is one of my all-time favorite filmmakers. So I would go to the drive-in to see if that new movie, Scream of the Demon Lover, might be a Mario Bava movie, because you never knew. You never knew. His name wouldn't be on the ads or anything. So when I see that these films are now available on Blu-ray, fully restored, widescreen, the original Italian language with English subtitles, I never dreamed that was possible. Now I'm talking about it because that's what Jim Rugg and Chris wanted to do with Tyrant. It's like, Steve, it's time to get this back out there in a new form. Botter, because we're doing this interview, right? When we're done, send me your snail mail. I'll mail you a set of Tyrant. Don't go looking for them, right?
Yes.
And that's not because I'm brown nosing.
This is why I do this podcast. No.
That's not why I'm brown nosing. It's just that.
Please continue.
But Jim and Chris were saying, no, this needs to be out in a book, collected now. And I don't know if I'll continue Tyrant, because I did Tyrant back in the mid-90s. I was a much younger man. I was definitely at the peak of my skill set. And I don't mean to sound like I'm bragging, but I know I was drawing the best I had ever drawn in my life. And I was totally focused on the project. It was my be-all and end-all as an artist, as a creator. My family, my budding relationship with Marjorie, who is now my wife, we've been together 31 years this weekend.
Wow.
That was my life, but my creative life was entirely Tyrant. And I don't know if I can get back in that zone. I don't know. I still have the drawing chops, but I don't draw as much as I used to. I write all the time. I'm primarily a writer. I write a lot for zines. I write books on film. I'm contributing to all these, Blu-ray and 4K releases with commentary tracks and video bonus features. I write for the booklets that come with the, these releases. I've got new books out, which we can mention before we're done.
Sure.
But, much as I would love to go back to Tyrant, I'm about to turn 71. I'm
Right.
not whining. I mean, Will Eisner and Joe Kubert drew until almost their final breath, if not to their final breath. And they're heroes of mine. I would love to have that kind of obsessive drive to draw all the time, but I don't know if I could produce anything remotely like what I did with Tyrant in the mid '90s. I was on fire, in terms of my lifelong dream to do this project, and I was getting to do it. And when all the pins got knocked out from under all of us that were self-publishing, I made my decision and I live with it.
I
So.
respect that, man. And if anyone deserves, you know what, I as much as I would love the continuation of Tyrant, one, I need to finish reading it myself.
you got 3
yeah,
issues to go,
exactly.
man.
I'm excited for this Kickstarter. I hope it's wildly successful. I have a feeling it will be. Stephen, we've been recording for more than an hour and a half, close to 2 hours. And I feel like we've covered everything I wanted to talk about,
Okay.
minus one thing. I would be remiss, and I almost feel like I need a part 2 with you to really get into
I'll
the
come
topic
back
here.
anytime. Just ask. I'm happy to come back. So
That's awesome. But you've mentioned, we've mentioned Swamp Thing a few times. You've mentioned Rick Veitch, Total Bin, and more. I will just ask, even though I probably have hundreds of questions about Saga of the Swamp Thing, I'll just ask this one last question and we can wrap up. Looking back on the Saga of the Swamp Thing, you mentioned earlier how prior to the Saga of the Swamp Thing, you didn't have nearly as many opportunities and doors open. Afterwards, it sounded like you could pick any project you wanted. Looking back on the Saga of the Swamp Thing, specifically the Moore Beach, Total Bin, and yourself, that run, it's held in such high regard. Like, it is the defining run for, I'd say, 99% of the people I've met and comic fans I know. In your words, and looking back, like, what do you think it is about that run that has left such an incredible impression on people and within like within DC history and just comics in general? Like, what do you think? What were the elements that made that such a remarkable run? And it sounds like, from what I can kind of glean, is it was a great experience and great moment in your career too. Like, what is it? What was it?
it was the chemistry, right there. I mean, twice in my life, I've been very fortunate in my life. I got to work in comics. It's what I wanted to do, and I got to do it. And then when I said I was done in comics, I got to teach comics for another 15 years. So I wasn't done yet, right? So I feel very fortunate. It was the chemistry. The first time in my life, I really enjoyed the kind of creative chemistry that, as a group, we got to enjoy with Swamp Thing, is when I met Rick Veitch. And for a number of years, Rick and I had a really strong creative chemistry. Rick misses it. I miss it too, but Rick talks about it now and again. He misses it. I am not a workaholic. Rick is definitely a workaholic, and as a result, the creative chemistry was great, but getting Bissette to knuckle down and meet the deadlines became a real hardship for Rick, right? And Rick works every day on his comics without fail.
Wow.
Spacey Steve Bissette, hey, I'm living back in Vermont after 4 years in New Jersey. I'm going to take some psilocybin mushrooms and go out in the woods and trip. It's like I drove Rick
Great.
bug fuck at
I
times,
fucking
right?
love that.
But Rick and I had an amazing creative chemistry where we would just sit down and brainstorm, and it was pure. I tried to teach some of the fundamentals of brainstorming to my students during the 15 years at CCS, where, and in short form to give it to you because it's relevant to your question about Swamp Thing, you've got to sit down and brainstorm with all filters off. There are no bad ideas. You write down every idea you have. It's in the next phase where you start to pick and choose, like, what are the best ideas that you have? And some of the great moments in comics are because the filters were off, right? The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles only exist because Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird were enjoying a real bond of friendship and chemistry. And they both came up with a stupid idea that made them both laugh their asses off and do a couple of drawings. And then the next morning they woke up and looked at them and went, huh, this might not be a bad idea, right? And they came up with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles out of nowhere, out of the blue, because of their chemistry. So I enjoyed that rare chemistry with Rick Veitch when we collaborated on a lot of stuff together. And then grew apart. not as friends. We're still good friends, but Rick fell into a wonderful editor-creator relationship with Archie Goodwin that I've never seen anything like it in my life. When Rick was in every issue of Epic Illustrated. Every issue of Epic
I
Illustrated.
love that magazine too.
It was
That's
an
a great
incredible magazine. And the one issue Rick did not have a story in, he colored somebody else's artwork, the Silver Surfer story that was
Oh,
in one of the issues, right?
is it the John Byrne Silver Surfer?
No, I think it was the John Buscema Silver Surfer story in issue 1. Rick colored that. And I moved on to other stuff. I got involved with Marvel Comics. I started contributing to Bizarre Adventures when Rick Marshall and then later Denny O'Neil were the editors. You know, we still were good friends. Then the opportunity to do Swamp Thing arrived, and I won't go into all the trappings, but it really came down to one of our Kubert School classmates and very close friend, Tom Yates, was the artist selected to launch this new Swamp Thing series, The Saga of the Swamp Thing. Now, Tom and I were odd ducks at the Kubert School, right? Not because of our personalities, because Tom's one of the most affable, lovable guys on planet Earth. It was because Tom wanted to do adventure comics, and nobody was publishing adventure comics, right? And Bissette wanted to do horror comics, and nobody was publishing horror comics, right? Especially the extreme horror comics I wanted to get into. So the closest thing Tom had been offered to an adventure comic was Swamp Thing. His thinking at the time, I remember Tom saying, well, you know, Swamp Thing's in the swamps, and that's kind of like drawing the jungle for a Tarzan comic, you know. Poor Tom, you know, issue 1, Marty Pasco, the writer, takes Swamp Thing out of the swamp. So Tom never really got to do a swamp issue of Swamp Thing. When Tom decided he'd had it, that he wasn't going to continue on the book, he did like 13 issues. He suggested John Tolliban and I step up to the plate. And he made that suggestion to the editor as well, Len Wein. And John and I auditioned for Swamp Thing. We did 2 sets of tryouts. I penciled a couple pages that John inked, and John penciled a couple pages that I inked. And we delivered those along with some character sketches. We did full-page sketches of some of the characters that appeared in those first 10 issues that Len wrote and Bernie writes and drew. And we got the gig. And so John Tolliban and I had almost as tight a chemistry as Rick Veitch and I had, but as artists, you know, collaborating on artwork. Not so much, we weren't writing stories together. We both had ideas. Rick and I would write and draw our own stories, like The Telltale Fart, our take on Edgar Allan Poe's Telltale Heart. With John, it was the artwork that we were jamming on. And John and I were very comfortable working together with my penciling and his inking. John had a much more refined, seductive, beautiful line than the spastic shit I lay down when I ink, right, with brush and pen. My stuff is much more spastic. I'll use that word again. Once we got the call from Len Wein that there was a new writer on the book, you know, Len calls us out of the blue, and we knew the book was near cancellation. They were about to cancel Swamp Thing with Swamp Thing number 19. And we were lucky that Len reached out to a British writer named Alan Moore. And Len was gobsmacked when he called us. And both John and I, separate phone calls, went, oh, we know Alan's work. We had been buying Warrior magazine, the British anthology magazine Warrior. And Alan had 2 serials in Warrior that we'd all been reading. John Tolliban, myself, Rick Veitch, we'd all been reading Marvel Man, which in America became Miracle Man, and V for Vendetta with artist David Lloyd. So we knew Alan's work, and we were really excited. And we immediately sent, John wrote a long letter to Alan. I wrote a long letter to Alan. This is before email. We couldn't call each other yet. We didn't have that contact info. And Alan, at the same time, was writing really long letters to John and to me. We all had our letters crossed in the mail. And here's the thing. We all wanted to go the same place with Swamp Thing.
Wow.
We all wanted to take the character into the realm of being an elemental, to take him out of the realm of, oh, poor me, a man trapped in a monster's body, which had been the modus operandi of Swamp Thing from his creation. That first story in House of Secrets number 92, is a tragic love story about a man who not only loses his love, he loses his humanity. He's a monster. And that had been the core of Swamp Thing as a character. We wanted to abandon that. We wanted Swamp Thing to come into his own as a plant being. And all three of us, four of us, counting Rick Veitch, because John Taliban, myself, and Rick Veitch have been talking about Swamp Thing ever since Tom Yates got the art gig on the book. In fact, Rick and John were assisting Tom right from issue 1 of Saga of the Swamp Thing. And I stepped in later. Tom asked me to lay out Swamp Thing number 8, Saga of the Swamp Thing number 8. I did the layouts on that. And I worked with Tom on one more issue, one of the Golem issues that Marty Pasco wrote later, issue 11 or 13. Anyway, came down to the fact that we all four wanted to go the same place with Swamp Thing. And complete coincidence, Bob, right? Complete coincidence. And Len Wein, who had rejected these ideas when Tom Yates had mentioned, oh, John Taliban's done this drawing of Swamp Thing, like maybe we should go in that direction. John had done this beautiful drawing of Swamp Thing where he's all overgrown with moss and ferns and has these sad looking eyes. Len thought it was too radical. It didn't look like, you know, the Swamp Thing design that DC was used to. But once Alan was on board and Alan had the idea, right, voiced the idea, Len was all for it. And right from Swamp Thing 21, the chemistry was there. When I got the script to Swamp Thing 21, Rick Veitch and I met late August of 1976 at the Kubert School. And from the moment we met, we became friends. And from the moment we became friends, we were talking about our dream of what was possible in comics. But we didn't have the ability, the skill set as writers to do what was in our head. We were always aiming for it, right? But we never got there. And when I got the script from Alan, from Len Wein, the editor, but it was Alan Moore's script to Swamp Thing 21, the anatomy lesson, I was blown away. This was everything Rick and I had been talking about since 1976. What was possible in comics, Alan did it in 22, 23 pages. It was right there. It's self-contained. And I still think that issue is one of the best things I've ever been part of, ever in my life creatively, was that story, that one issue. And the chemistry was on. And for about 2 years, we were really cooking. And it was that chemistry. And it was luck. This is dumb luck. But it was also the fact that Len Wein put up with the fact that John and I were friends. Len Wein put up with a relationship between a penciler and an inker that DC did not encourage.
Oh, wow.
Right? They didn't want all the creators to be friends and know each other.
Yeah, I could see
They
why.
wanted all the jobs handled. They wanted us to be assembling Volkswagens, if you will, or Toyotas, right? You do the body, you do the frame, you're putting the doors on, you're the windshield person, right? It was all designated as separate jobs. And John and I, from the start, man, when I got a script, I would photocopy it and send it to John. And then I said, Len, why don't you just FedEx the script to John at the same time you're sending it to me? And Len agreed to do that. So John and I would have the same script in our hands, same day, and we would get on the phone and talk about what we were going to do with the artwork. And then once Alan was on board and we were all exchanging the letters, you know, John and I were suggesting story ideas. It was our plot to have Etrigan and the Camera, you know, Jack Kirby's the demon and the little fear creature in a school for autistic children, because my first wife, Marlene, was working in a school for autistic children. And I had the idea, like, that would be the worst place for a fear monster to be. And for the monster, the best place to be, because there's a lot of fear there to feed on. So the chemistry is what made it, right? And the chemistry was spot on until, and this shows you how tight the chemistry is. Alex Gaylor is the current editor at DC doing the collected editions that we're getting invited to contribute to. I've written essays for a number of the DC Omnibus editions. Alex Gaylor reached out to me, and this was a year and a half ago, and he said he really had to work on me, too, because I said no a lot. They're doing a collected omnibus of Crisis on Infinite Earths. And he wanted, because there was a Swamp Thing issue, he was inviting the living writers and artists who had worked on crossover issues during the whole Crisis thing, where every DC book had to have a Crisis issue that particular month. And I said, Alex, you don't want what I'm going to write. And he said, why not? And I said, that's the book where John Tolman and I decided we were done, right? Like, this is it. And this is how close the chemistry is. I'm not exaggerating, Botter. John was reaching for the phone to call me to say he was going to quit the book. And the phone rang before he got to it. And it was me calling to say, John, I've had it. I'm done. Right? We knew at the same time. And John put it this way at the time. He said, we put this car in the road and now DC wants us in the back seat. And that's how it felt. Like once the editors were meeting and deciding what the next year of books at DC were going to be, we didn't have the creative room that we had enjoyed for the initial run on Swamp Thing, where issue to issue, story arc to story arc, we were organically working with Alan Moore and our editor, Karen Berger, who took over the book as of issue 25. Once DC was saying, oh, no, you got to stop what you're doing and do this crisis issue, we knew it was over. Like, okay, we no longer are the ones able to determine what stories we're going to tell, how, and where. So,
wow. Yeah, I think a part 2 is definitely needed. That was incredible. That was a mini podcast in its own. That was incredible.
Okay, sorry to take up so much time, though.
No apologies needed. That was fantastic. I can't wait to reread Swamp Thing with all of this context in my head. But Stephen, I think with that being said, ladies and gents, this is the Shortbox Podcast, and we just finished talking to Stephen Bissette about a lot of things. We talked about dinosaurs. We talked about this new Tyrant Kickstarter that is launching early March, which this episode should be up by then. We talked about Saga of the Swamp Thing, clearly. We talked about the direct market. We talked about the power of Kickstarter. We talked about a lot of different things. I'm going to have a link to the Kickstarter in the show notes. I'll have a couple of other links in the show notes and episode description. Make sure that you check those out. Stephen, this has been fantastic. Any parting words or shameless plugs before we wrap up?
Yeah, we haven't talked about print on demand, and I'll part by talking about print on demand, right? If you don't want to get involved as a creator with crowdfunding, you don't want to get involved with Patreon and all the different platforms that can bring in income while you're putting your work up online, don't ignore print on demand. I am using print on demand. Ingram Spark has a print on demand platform. I'm using Amazon's Kindle
nice.
print on demand. I'm doing a new book series called Paleo Pop, collecting my articles about dinosaur movies and media and comics and so on.
That's cool.
I have used print on demand to do not one, not two, but 3 sketchbooks so far that are edited and curated by my good friend and graphic novelist and author, Mark Mastel. We just put out In the Mood for Monsters. It's available on Amazon. And we also have the earlier Thoughtful Creatures and Brooding Creatures. These are available black and white paperback, color paperback, or color hardcover. And this is over 120 pages of just monsters. So if you just want me drawing monsters, you get it. And the film buff in me is doing a series of books using print on demand called Cryptid Cinema, where I am laying out the genre of cryptid movies about Bigfoot, Yeti, and fictional cryptids, Swamp Thing, King Kong, Godzilla, the creature from the Black Lagoon. So far, my buddy Tim Pax and I have put out 2 volumes of Cryptid Cinema using print on demand. And we have a 3rd and 4th volume in the works right now that'll be out hopefully this year. But more importantly for comics, take a look at what Rick Veitch has done with print on demand. I turned Rick onto the better printing on print on demand by showing him some of the zines. I write for zines like Bare Bones. I'm in every issue of Bare Bones as a writer. And I showed Rick what those print on demand volumes look like. And Rick, being Rick, has built a whole new publishing empire doing print on demand comics, brand new comics. He's doing Roaring Rick's Rarebit Fiends, his dream comic, and he's also expanded his King Hell Heroica universe into new Max Immortal series. And this is terrific work. As we're speaking right now, Botter, Rick only has another 100 pages to go to complete the entire King Hell Heroica that he began with with Archie Goodwin editing him for Marvel's epic imprint back in the 1990s.
Oh,
late
wow.
80s. So
That's impressive.
print on demand. If you don't want to go the crowdfunding route, you don't
Sure.
want to go the route of Patreon and other online digital comic platforms. If you're a writer drawing your own comics, look into print on demand. You can do it on your home laptop, and Amazon and Ingram distribute around the world. Your work can be out there.
Wow.
There you go. That's
Great
as
food for
positive
thought.
as I can be, my
Yeah,
friend.
no, that was great. I will. I just found your account on, or your profile on Amazon that has all these books listed. I'll include a link to all of this in the show notes. Stephen, you are by far the busiest retired guy.
Yeah, I do keep busy. I've got. I mean,
Ah,
I know we're breaking off, but I have brand new commentary tracks with a number of film releases that are just out on Blu-ray 4K, including The Devil's Reign, starring William Shatner and Ernest Borgnine.
hey.
Dan Curtis's Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with Jack Palance. Dan Curtis's Portrait of Dorian Gray from 1973. Those are in Kino's Cults box sets of Dan Curtis Monsters and Dan Curtis Gothics. Tim Lucas and I have also been doing video bonus features for lots of films. We have two brand new ones out with Ilsa, Tigress of Siberia, and Ilsa, the Wicked Warden, two of the most despicable drive-in movies ever made. And I got lots more that'll be coming out, work that I've already finished that hasn't been released as yet. So
There we go. Steve,
there
this
you
has
go.
been,
I'll shut
yeah.
up now.
No, this has been great. Best of luck on the Kickstarter. I look forward to it.
Botter, thank you so much.